you learn something about the people of Butler. We all know the facts of Butler, or most of us do, but I wanted you to learn about the people and the trauma. I also want to tell you that I'm going to give you a little disclaimer. I am a guide at the Butler and Watauga Heritage Museum, and I encourage you to come and visit us. We're open most weekends from May to October. You can also call and ask for a tour. Sometimes you can get somebody, sometimes you can't. That'll be more available after I retire. And it is just a little gem of a museum, so you really should, stop by and check it out when you get a chance. But mostly today I'm going to talk to you about the museum and the story of Butler, because I think the story of the people, really, we need to remember what happened. It also explains some attitudes within our town now. So my disclaimer is, this is my opinion, not that of the Butler and Watauga Heritage Museum. And there are some things that are in the TVA, some language in the TVA records that some of you may be offended by. I know I am. We have to remember it's indicative of the time and it's not appropriate today, but I am going to be saying some of those things. My son reminded me that we're being recorded and somebody might take it out of context in the future if I run for president. But if you knew my son, you would know why you would laugh. Okay. There's a lot of pictures in here, so I just wanted to share some of the pictures. This is 1947, a view of the town. This is the summer. Most people have already moved, and it affected more than just the town of Butler. We're talking about the entire Watauga Reservoir area. It was actually a pretty robust little town. So you wonder why we have a museum to Butler? Well, the Alumni Association wanted everyone to remember the trauma and the story of the only incorporated town taken by the TVA. And I wanted to make sure that we tell the stories of the people associated with the Watauga Dam Project. Okay. Isn't it beautiful? Okay. Sometimes Butler is referred to as the town that wouldn't drown. And this is Russell Mink pulling his little red wagon sometime in the early 40s, I think around 42. And if you want to come by the Butler Museum, you can have your photo taken with Russell. A lot of people do. And this is a very iconic picture, actually downtown Butler. Butler had about everything. They had schools, they had movie theaters, hotels, places to eat, couple banks. This is one of the most unusual things at the Butler and Watauga Heritage Museum. It's an ad, but it kind of gives you an idea of the poverty level of some of the people. Who wants a live baby, a live eating, breathing, crying baby to be given away? Father deserted, leaving mother with a large family of little ones, and she's unable to care for all of them. So this T.K. Kelly has been asked to find a home for the baby. And it's going to be given away at the Finley, Preston, Curtis, and Sons store. The day that changed for everyone in Butler is December 1st, 1948. I think we're up to 74 years now. And without fanfare, the steel gates were closed to begin the water storage, which means they were inside that glory hall out there, and they closed everything. And within 15 minutes, water started gathering already. It took about only 8 months to create the beautiful Watauga Lake. There was also a lot of fish that died that day that didn't have any water, just so you know. There you go. All right. This tells you the level of sympathy, I guess, that people had for the people of the Watauga Reservoir area. The Bristol Herald Courier, May 24th, 1947, said, "The people of Butler will lose nothing because they must abandon their old houses and establish new ones." Now think about your home and think about how you would feel if I told you you had to move today. Okay, Jenny. All right, let's talk about the timeline. Everybody kind of know what happened in the 1930s, that little thing called the Great Depression. Okay, so let's think about the people of this area. They went through the Great Depression. My father always said they didn't really know they were poor because everybody was poor. Here, the Depression didn't really affect money. But 1939, the Watauga Dam Project was approved by Congress. And then 1940, the flood came through and washed out the train. It was a flood that caused a lot of damage, and there was several lives lost. So 1941, we have the preparations for the dam starting. They're coming and they're surveying people. They're figuring out where people live, who owns property, who has the deeds. They start looking at the cemeteries. They're starting all this prep work. And then be aware, December 7th, 1941, there was that little thing called Pearl Harbor. That also happened. So these people didn't get any reprieve from the Great Depression. They just things keep happening. So 1942, the construction of the dam began. But everybody keeps thinking this may not happen. And so we still have a war going on. We have rationing going on. 1943, in October, they stopped construction on the dam. And the reason for that is a shortage of manpower, and materials. They really wanted to finish the dam for the production of electricity to assist with the plants in Elizabethton, but it just wasn't to be. So people think from 43 to 47, they had other things to do during that time. But in 47, they come back and the construction of the dam resumed. And then in December 1st of 48, again, they closed the gates and they started the water storage for the Watauga Dam. Okay, so some of the things I want you to think about as we talk about these people. Remember, they have to move. And these are some things that were on ration in the 40s. Cars, bicycles, fuel, gasoline, stoves, rubber footwear, not sure about that one, shoes, sugar, coffee, processed foods, which most of these people did not do processed foods, canned meats and fish, canned milk, fats, and typewriters. The big ones to remember are bicycles, gasoline, cars, fuel, kerosene, because you're going to need some of those things to move, probably. Go ahead. Okay, Butler was settled in 1768. So they've been there a long time. It was located where the Watauga River and the Roan Creek met. And by 1820, there was 50 families living there, and it was called Smith's Mill. Okay. So when did it become Butler? I'm really not sure. I tried to look it up. It was in the early 1900s, or maybe the last of the 1800s, but it was after the Civil War. And the town was incorporated. It was named after Roderick Butler of Mountain City. And the reason is he was a lieutenant colonel of the 13th Cavalry of the United States. Yes, he was Union. He was the colonel from 1863 to 1864. And many of the people in the lower end of the county actually were part of the 13th Cavalry. And so both Carter and Johnson County people joined the 13th Cavalry. That's a whole story within itself. Maybe someday we can get my brother to do something on that. And so they wanted to name the town after him. Go ahead. He was born in Wytheville in 1827. He moved to Mountain City. He married Emmeline Donnelly. She was prominent Johnson County family. And he studied law and he was admitted to bar in 1853. He served in the Civil War. He became a member of the United States House of Representatives. And he built the Butler Mansion, but he built it after the Civil War because of fears that it would get burned during the Civil War, because basically this area of the county was occupied by the Confederates and Confederate marauders during that time. And he died in August 18th, 1902, and he is buried in Mountain View Cemetery. The train. The train was very exciting times for Butler because it opened it up so that they can get their things to market. They could make a quick run to Bristol or Kingsport or not Bristol or Elizabethton for the day, do shopping, get things that they needed, go see family. But the big thing was the economic boom of the train. So it really did connect them to the world, because you got to remember, it took a long time to get from Butler to Mountain City or Butler to Elizabethton at that time. And most of these people did not have cars. Actually, I only found 2 people in all the stuff from the TVA where they had cars. Okay. I thought this, everybody, I have to throw this one in because in 1910, Elvis Shown, Howard Rambo, she's one of my grades, she got ran over by the train at Doe Station and was killed. As far as I know, she is the only train fatality in Johnson County. She was quite old when that happened. I think she was in her 70s. Quite old for the time. That's not old now, right? It's looking younger and younger. Okay. Butler was this beautiful valley. It was plenty of water, which was, a lot of people, when they were surveyed by the TVA, their big concern on moving was making sure that their property had water. And why was that? Well, you have to have water for your house. You have to have water for your livestock. So water was very important. The problem with Butler was there was 2 rivers and 2 large creeks, the Elk River, or the Run Creek, Cobbs Creek, and the Watauga. So there was a lot of water. So that meant there was flooding. The original town of Butler was subjected to frequent floods, and they experienced major floods. And this is just not, a lot of times these floods were loss of life. So the major floods were in 1867, 86, 1901, 1902, 1916, 1924, and 1940. So it's obvious why the TVA selected the Watauga Reservoir area for the dam. It wasn't really to protect the people of Johnson County or Johnson County. It was to protect the people downstream. So it makes perfect sense. This is where it should be. So this was one of those things that the government did where the needs of the few, the needs of the many are outweighed by the needs of the few. The flood washed out the train. It was deadly. There was, I think, at least 3 people died. I think might be more than that. And there are more than that in North Carolina as well, because this flood was horrendous. And it was really the last flood for those people. Go ahead. So what happens? We think maybe we're going to have a dam. We've been hearing about this since 1939. We've been, no one can do anything until they know for sure what's going to happen. So 1940, basically it was sealed. The deal was sealed. They're going to go ahead and build a dam, even though everybody had hope. The railroad was not replaced. TVA already had approval for the 37th dam. The primary reason for the dam was flood control. And the secondary reason was electric generation. Go ahead. This is on the TVA website. It's a nice picture. Okay, so the Watauga Dam Project really changed the lives of a lot of people, not just the 650 people who were assessed, but a lot of people, because there is still some of our attitudes today are a result of what happened then. Go ahead. Okay, so what did the TVA do? Well, they came in and they purchased 11,700 acres of land. Anyone want to guess what that does to a tax base? Even though taxes weren't really high at the time compared to what they are now, that's 11,700 acres that we no longer pay taxes on. They built 3 bridges. The project was in both Johnson and Carter counties. They moved the Butler substation, and yes, Butler did have electricity, Not everybody out in the reservoir area had electricity, but Butler did. They moved that to Mountain City. They replaced 54.9 miles of road. The roads you ride on today were not there. Most of them weren't there at the time. And they built the Watauga Dam. The Watauga Dam was 318 feet. Was the second highest dam, or it is the second highest dam. And at the time that it was built, it was the highest earthen dam completed in the United States. It is completed totally of earth and rock that was harvested, for lack of a better term, maybe I should use the word blasted, from the Cardinals Bluff area. The first people to leave, to have to move, are the people of Cardinals Bluff. And the reason for that is the constant blasting. I can't imagine. I did read some articles that talked about how far, at least 50 miles sometimes, they could feel the blasting going on. And this was like nonstop. They would set it up, blast it, move it, set it up, blast it. It wasn't like one blast a day. The Watauga Dam has been generating electricity since 1949, and there's been no major flooding in that area. We're not going to talk about up in Pandora since the dam was completed. And the lake is beautiful, and it is got 105 miles of shoreline and 6,400 acres of reservoir area. Now, please note, 6,400 acres of reservoir area. How many acres did they buy? 11,000 acres. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the people. There were 650 families living in the reservoir area with the possibility of relocation. The TVA actually did a really good job with their pencils and math skills to figure out how far up the lake line is going to be and who to move. Of the 650 families, 598 families had to be relocated. And different places I see different things, but this seems to be the consistent number, 598 families, okay? These families lived off the land. This is one of my favorite pictures from one of my cousins, a Shawn cousin. This was taken around 1909, and this is in the Butler area, and they were cutting timber. But most of the family in Butler were subsistence farmers, and they lived off the land. Lumber was big. I mean, we had multiple lumber companies in Old Butler, but they were kind of dying down, particularly after the train, because it's hard to get lumber to and from, particularly in an era where you couldn't buy trucks, cars, and you had difficulty with buying gas, okay? Okay, tobacco was the cash crop that people used to pay their taxes. And yes, they did have to pay their taxes during these years. So even though they knew that they had to move, their neighbors had already moved. Some of them were living out there by themselves in the dark. They still had to pay their taxes. Tobacco was the cash crop that helped them pay and buy the essentials that they needed that they couldn't get off the land. Okay, let's talk about the family assessment. And I really want to know, what would you say today if someone come and ask you these questions? So each family of the Watauga Reservoir area were assessed. And, they started with, where do you live? Do you own your house? How much do you owe on your house? Who lives in your house? How old are they? What's their education level? Where do they work? And then what's your water source? Do you have electricity? Do you have screens on your windows? Then what's your income? What's your religion? What's your health? How many cows, chickens, horses, pigs do you have? How many hams do you have, okay? How many canned foods? How many bushels of potatoes and sweet potatoes do you have put away? And what is your attitude towards the authority? By the way, they refer to themselves as the authority. do you think they may have wanted to make these people feel a little bit intimidated? If the authority came to visit you and ask you these questions, would you answer? The check. When you finally got the check, that means you have 30 days. So they finally buy your land. You agree on what they're going to give you. You have 30 days. That means you have to find a property. If you haven't done so, you have to pack up and move, and you've got 30 days to do so. That's it. Now, they did give you some salvage rights, which we'll talk about in a little while. The salvage rights, well, let me go ahead and talk about it now. If you had a nice house, you could move your house. But the TVA deducted a little bit from your check if you bought your house and you had your house moved. But remember, we have gasoline is rationed, so are trucks and cars. But they gave you salvage rights to your buildings, so you could tear your buildings down and use the wood for other things. They were basically asking you to tear your own home down so they didn't have to do it for you. I'm sorry, that's my opinion. But a lot of people did, and they reused that wood. There's a lot of people who took down their own outbuildings, and took them. If you didn't take your house, the TVA might sell your house if it's movable, or they might sell it for salvage. And some of the homes were actually rented during the period that when the dam was being built, because they needed places for their workers if the workers weren't local. The authority was very clear about what you could take and what you could not take. I saw a nice little thing where a guy could not buy a water pump. Again, a lot of stuff were in shortage because of the war. And so he took the one in his house, and he had built a new house. And the authority came and asked what happened to it. And his wife says, I have no idea. And they said, well, it's on our list. It's ours. We can sue you for that. And then she said, well, I don't know. We didn't take it. No, at that point, it was the authority's house.
Oh, no, the authority's house. I mean, they lost it.
Yeah, they did. Somebody went into the authority's house. So this is what I want to tell you about some of the people. This is the other part of this assessment. So Cobbs Creek neighborhood is in the Butler community. The original family was subsistence farmers. They supplement their income by farm labor and part-time industrial employment. I like this. The people of this community as a whole have strong family ties and are God-fearing, devout people. The Cobbs Creek Baptist Church and School serve their neighborhood. So they assessed every little neighborhood in the area. Okay. So this is my great-grandmother. I have to show this one because I think it's very traumatic what happened. And when the authority came to her house or bought her home, they did not buy all of her land. Did y'all know that? If they came to your house, they would assess what they need and maybe a little extra, but they wouldn't buy all your land. Even though they left her with some nice forested, straight up the side of a mountain land that was going to be very nice, very expensive, lakefront property 80 years later, 75 years later, but they left her with these extra acres of land and no road access. So she sold her lakefront property to be lakefront property for $200 to buy her a team of horses to help her move. The TVA did not actually move you, okay? They just told you had to move. They didn't pay to move your house. So she needed something she didn't have a car or a truck. This is her house. It couldn't be moved. I don't know that she salvaged it. I'm not sure. It could have been salvaged. Go ahead. So this was her family and home assessment. She was a widow who came to the Kite Holler 30 years ago and is living in her original home. Her husband, Hiram, died 5 years ago. Since that time, her son-in-law, Bud, and his family have been living with her. She is very devoted to that family and to her dilapidated house. Mrs. Kite cried as if her heart would break when the worker talked to her about her plans for moving. She talked continually of her dead husband and what a good man he was. She'd always lived here. She'd raised her children there, and they're changing her whole world. So when the authority brought her home, they didn't buy all of her land. They left her what would become lakefront property, as I already told you, but no road access. And then she had to sell that in order to be able to move. And she was lucky. She got to buy a house at about 5 acres in the new town, and she was able to grow her garden and still go fishing and those things that she liked to do. Her only income was what her son-in-law could make off the farm, which consisted of 30 acres of rough land. So please note, 30 acres of land, and then she moved to 5. But now she did have a better house, and but she still didn't have electricity or water in that house at the time she moved. These people have no definite plans, and it is the opinion of the worker that they will be quite a problem to move, which they weren't. I guess they didn't realize how strong these mountain people were, because a lot of the people that the authority thought couldn't do it, did it. This is Mr. Stout. By the way, I felt like when I was reading these, that I was reading the gossip columns of my neighbors, because I knew so many of these people, or at least knew of them. So think about your biggest worry that you've had in the last couple of weeks. Mine was my car battery died, so I had to go buy a car battery. Not that I couldn't afford it. My worry was getting to Mountain City in time before the place closed to buy one. But so they had a 2-story weather-boarded house in very good condition, well furnished, well kept. The outside surroundings were very neat. Him and his family were in good health. He was considered the best farmer in the community and says he does a good day's work every day. His son, Gail, was inducted to the Army on July 1st. So in addition to moving, trying to find property, his son just got inducted to the Army. I don't know where Gail actually served in the Army. Okay. So let's talk about Mrs. Osborne. She appeared rather intelligent. I'm wondering if today they would even think of putting something like that. She's intelligent and energetic. She is young and attractive. She is quite disturbed about the removal of her baby from the cemetery, in which he was buried a short time ago. She is very anxious to know when the grave removal section will transfer this body so that she can see that it's done at a place where she desires. So her biggest concern wasn't moving. It was the moving of her baby. The Campbells live in a dilapidated shack, which is said to be in Mrs. Campbell's name, which, ladies, most of us did not own land at that point in time. It just didn't happen. The furniture was crude. The building was falling to pieces. There were no screens, and the entire atmosphere of poverty and neglect. No effort has been made to keep the house in repair. And this is among the 2 or 3 worst homes in the Butler. The taxes haven't been paid on this place for a number of years, and the title to the place has not been recorded. I'm not sure I would have paid my taxes either if I knew they were going to take my land, I'll be honest, because, what else could they do to you besides take your land? Mr. Hartley stated that he had looked at numerous places in Johnson County, but everything they had seen had prices attached to it that were exorbitant. So remember, there's 598 families that need to move. Most of them are farmers. Most of them needed at least 20 to 25 acres of land. So it was a seller's market. And you might be shocked to learn that people price gouged. I know that. Are you shocked? So in addition to that, as the prices went up, the TVA didn't increase how much they're giving you for their land. They're still staying right around. They don't want to make your life better. They want to make your life even. Mr. Hartley was very volatile and very excited with profanity thrown in. I'm sorry, I probably would be one of those too. He's extremely hostile toward the whole proposed dam and the TVA, and stated that the project was making Axis sympathizers of every person in the area, that if anyone could go along with him to the dam, he would blow the thing up with dynamite, and that he would take a great personal pleasure in shooting Senator McKellar, that it would be not be safe for the appraiser to arrive if he did not appraise his property to be at where he considered it was worth. Although extremely hostile towards the TVA, he was very cordial and friendly to the worker. Today, I'm afraid he might have been put in jail just for saying those things. Go ahead. All right, Mrs. Clausen receives public assistance in the form of aid-dependent children. She's caring for her grandson and granddaughter. Some dependence is placed on the older daughter who resides with her. She receives $30 a month in a pension. Her husband was a Spanish-American war veteran. There was Spanish-American, World War I, World War II, all veterans who lived in Old Butler. Mayor Reese informed the worker that the son of Rebecca Clausen was reported missing in action somewhere in the Pacific. So Mrs. Clausen and her family moved somewhere in Elizabethton. Okay. I don't know if y'all know, there was 3 colored families in Butler. So this colored family lives in a 3-room house, which is in poor condition. Part of the window panes are broken, and the porch is almost ready to fall down. Weeds and tore down fence surround the house. The family appeared to be in good health. They are polite and talked intelligently. The attitude of the family is very cooperative toward the authority in its program. The family will not have enough means to relocate. They would need advice and assistance from outside agencies, and that means they really called Aid to Family with Children, the social services in whatever county. There wasn't a lot of help for these people. So Mr. Vault relocated to Washington County, having purchased a home and a lot in Johnson City. And this is one of the 3 colored families in the Watauga Reservoir area. Not sure this term's used very much anymore, but this mulatto family, according to the neighbors, have association with both Black and white. Tom's mother, Martha, could easily be mistaken for a white woman. Some of the children are colored while others are practically white. They have attended the colored school in the community, are all very intelligent and industrious. 2 of the sons are now employed by the TVA. Their home is a 3-room house in poor condition. It is surrounded by weeds and trees and making it almost impossible to approach the house without soiling one's clothes. Martha Bowman receives $6 a month in an old age assistance. And judging from the conversation with Tom and Martha Bowman, their attitude is indifferent. And since the family is a tenant farmer, it will be somewhat difficult to find a desirable place to continue their farming activities. I love this because I did know the Bowmans. Tom Bowman bought 20 acres of ground from R.H. Goodwin at Deauville in Johnson County. And again, they say this is one of the 3 colored families found in the reservoir area, and he remained in Johnson County. He wasn't as difficult to move as they thought. Okay, as time approached, Mrs. Lewis to leave her objections to move increased. She did not want to go until after her children had moved away. It was pointed out it was better for her children to go ahead and move before the property had to be taken. Basically, her family moved her out. They practically carried her to the car and forced her to move. Ezekiel Smith died September 14th as a result of a self-inflicted bullet wound. He was buried on September 15th, 1942. The account of Mr. Smith's death, which was carried in the newspaper, made mention of the attitude toward the TVA's program in construction of the Watauga Dam. For some months, he had been brooding over the fact that he would have to move from his old home, since that track was within the reservoir area. And you can see that the members of the family said that he had grieved because of the Cardin's Bluff TVA Dam Project, which compelled him to move. And so he committed suicide. J.D. Prophet, he was one of the graduates of Watauga Academy. He was the doctor. And he served the community very well for 66 years. And I know these pictures are not good, but this is all I could find. Go ahead. He stayed in Butler until he was 91, and he continued to practice for many, many years. He was a member of Rock Springs Baptist Church. Go ahead. I think the important thing here is that Dr. Prophet earned a great deal of money for his services, but collected only a small amount. He accumulated quite a bit of land and some farming land, but a great deal of mountain land. He is a tall, skinny man and wears black tie and white shirt. His clothes are poorly kept, and he does not have a very neat or attractive appearance. Appearance is everything. He has never been with a hat that looked like it fitted his head, and it's always pulled down over his eyes. For the past 10 or 12 years, Dr. Prophet's son has been taking him to see his patients in an automobile. He has all the work that he can do now at his age. He seldom turns down a call. He is the most remarkable man of his age, considering the hardships that he has undergone. He is a native. He is active as he is at the present time. He would see you no matter what. And actually, all the physicians in Butler, they rode on horseback no matter what time of day, what time of night, and they would come and see you. You might give them a chicken, you might give them some beans, you might give them some potatoes, but a lot of these times they did not get paid. So let's talk about Mr. Smith was satisfied with the offer that TVA to purchase his land. Consequently, or he was not satisfied. So he refused to sign the option contract to sell his property to the authority. And so he hired an attorney and was given so he told his attorney to deal with the authority. The authority found an error at this point of approximately 1 acre of land, so they made him a new contract accordingly. The contract was then acceptable, and Mr. Smith signed it in 42. Go ahead. Okay, let's talk about Mrs. Stout. During the conversation with Mrs. Stout, I love this one, I really do. She was allowing the baby to nurse, and then occasionally she would get up from the swing with the baby in her arms and spit off the porch. She has the habit of a great many mountain people dipping snuff. Mrs. Stout's sister does most of the housework, and she has made her home with them for several years. I'm thinking dipping snuff and nursing don't go together these days. Okay, this man was allowed, I like this because, you know, I grew up in the 70s where long hair was a thing. So this man has allowed his hair to grow exceptionally long. And the last time he was seen, it was hanging below his shoulders. I am so appalled. He has at one time been in an institution for the insane. Mr. Trivette, draws a pension as he was a Spanish-American War veteran. Until recently, half of his pension went to his daughter. Some attempt has been made on parts of the family to contact this man, but on each occasion, the relatives were considered an unwelcome guest and asked to leave. He has one brother in Indiana. Mr. Trivette was last seen going down the Watauga River in a small boat, which he had purchased. He left the property of Will Goodwin and is now located in a tent near the Y in Elizabethton.
Or he probably had PTSD.
I was going to say, we took very good care of our veterans.
Well, you know.
Even though the VA was there, I bet. This old colored man lives in a shack, which is almost ready to fall down. He does his own cooking and farms a little for some neighboring families. He is not able to do much work, and according to the welfare department, is eligible for old age pension, but he has never made a request for this assistance. His education is very limited, but he talks intelligently and interestingly. His attitude toward the TVA and his program is good. He does not know what he'll do. He expects to receive a fairly good sum for his property and stated he thought he would locate to where his son is in Johnson County if he can find a place. Okay. Okay, Babe Curtis, I just did want you to know about Selma Curtis. She was the donated land and money to start the Butler and Watauga Heritage Museum. She was from Watauga Butler. She was from Butler. She actually lived inside the city of Butler in what was considered a mansion at that time, but her house could not be moved. She bought someone else's house and moved it to New Butler, and she set her house close to the Watauga School. She was a music teacher. She was a graduate of Watauga Academy. She went on to college for a year and studied music. She taught a lot of kids the piano throughout the years. This was Mayor Reese. It's not a great picture, but it's the best I could do. The Reese family had lived in the neighborhood for about a century. Grant is a distant relative of Carol Reese, the congressman at the time. And to his statement, it's not distant enough to suit him. Mr. Reese was elected mayor of the town of Butler and holds that office at the present time. There are those who speak very highly of Mr. Reese, and although they do not think he's suited for his position, they say he represents the better element in the community. And it was possible to eliminate the other candidates by him using his friends and family. He's an old man and has raised a large family, and it is because of his affiliation with the retired farmers and church-going element that he is able to be mayor. Okay, let's talk about how hard it was to move. It was hard. Like I say, we had a little price gouging going on. If you wanted to stay in Johnson Carter County, there was a shortage of places to move. These were farmers, and to make a living farming, you needed, at least 20 acres of land, but you needed closer to 30. And of the 598 families, very few got their offers from the TVA in 1942 and 1943. Most of the people who got their offers at that point in time were like Cardin's Bluff and the land right where the dam was going to be built, and those where the road was coming through. They got that land first so they can do the work. Then a lot of people did not get their offers until 47. So think about this. From 1940, 39, 40 until 1947, really these people couldn't do much. They couldn't sell their house. Who wants to buy a house that's going to be inundated within the next little while? How do you know how much you're going to get for your house? You can't buy a new house because you don't have the money to do anything until you know how much you're going to get for your old house. There was a lot of price gouging going on. And remember that every house, church, store, school, and business, all of them had to be moved. The TVA purchased the house, the land, and the outbuildings, but they did give people the salvage rights, which already they were allowed to buy their houses back and have them moved, but that did cost them. And remember, again, there's a shortage of fuel. And how many house moving companies do you think there is around? And it took about a week to move a house, even if it was only a short way. The TVA did not pay for the people to move or give any kind of assistance. Many torn down their own buildings and harvest the wood for reuse. And a lot of people did harvest their own timber in case they wanted to build a house. And that helped the TVA out, so they didn't have to pay as much to get all that done. So there was a lot of uncertainty. The 37th dam was approved in 39. The 40 was, again, big flood. And people were really afraid of flooding and dying in flooding in that area. There were a few lucky enough to get their property sold early, but for the most part, no. And many people in the Butler area, their children or themselves were called into service in World War II. Some went to work for the TVA because, everybody was excited to have a job. We're coming out of the Great Depression. And the remaining families that were unable to really sell anything in between 39 and 47. So I always thought this was very interesting. 300 citizens of Johnson County and Carter County got together and had a mass meeting to protest the appraisal practices of the TVA. I know that shocks you that some people think that maybe they weren't on the up and up. R.A. Cordner was a local merchant who was chairman. I talked to him about this in the 70s when I was doing a research paper, and he said he finally got a good enough deal. But there are people who did sue the authority to get better pricing. Go ahead. So this is Mr. and Mrs. Goodwin. L.H. Goodwin, they were the largest landholders in the reservoir area. They had about 400 acres, and they had been on that acreage for at least 4 generations. This is Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence Duggar. Mrs. Duggar worked at the new Watauga School, and she retired there. They were one of the last 3 families to leave the Watauga Reservoir area. Dewey and Gypsy Ward lived in Butler, and their biggest concern at the time was getting their tobacco allotments moved over to their new house. I hadn't really thought about, or their new land. If you had a large tobacco allotment and you had a lot of land, and you got a 5-acre property in Old Butler, how did you get that moved over? That's a big deal. That's their livelihood. Mrs. Gregg built a new house above the line where her property line is, above their lake. But she also had a house below the shoreline, and she was supposed to get it moved. After the closure of the dam, it resulted in a lawsuit with the house moving, and they eventually got it moved before the water got there. And there was no inconvenience suffered by the TVA or disruption in the TVA activities. But they did sue them because they hadn't moved their house yet. This is some of the Shannon family enjoying some time at the Watauga River. I just want people to remember that they were families there. They were just like all of us. Go ahead. The Butler and Watauga Heritage Museum pays tribute to World War II veterans. So we did have a lot of World War II veterans in the Watauga Reservoir area. Here's just 3 pictures of Joseph Litford, who's still alive today, Jackson Glover, John Shown. I did want to mention Kermit Atkins, who did have a photo at the Watauga or at the museum. He actually received 3 Bronze Stars, and he was at the Battle of the Bulge. Joseph Litford was in an armored tank division. He's also a heavily decorated wounded veteran. And Leland Bailey, he served in Panama, and he came home, and he was living with his parents in Butler, and he was shell-shocked. We had some brothers that served. This is G.H. Pierce's children, Delmer and George. Delmer was in Rome, and George was in the Naval Hospital in California. This is John Milton Vaught, one of the three families in Butler. And I wish I knew his service record. That's next on my list to look for. I just love this picture of him. Okay, the Butler Post Office. Joshua Perkins was the first postmaster. Initially, they delivered mail on horseback, but then they eventually did get some driving going on. When you sent something to the Butler Post Office, you just put a name on it in Butler and Tennessee usually, and you usually got it. When the town moved to Carterview or changed to Carterview, you no longer had Butler, you had Carterview, and it changed back to Butler in 1953. And that's the post office. Okay. You got to go to the Butler Museum to see the displays. The original boxes from the Butler post office are there. And some of the people who were volunteered and helped create the museum would actually open them up because they remember their numbers from that time. I hope they wrote those down. W.S. Stout. W.S. Stout store was moved from Old Butler to Pine Orchard Road. So, I always knew that we were almost to my grandma's house when I saw the sign. That was my big thing. He was very bitter towards the TVA. He does not agree with the practices of building dams. Even though, he had severe damage in 1940. The worker tried to explain everything to him, but he was not impressed, and he continued to berate the senators and representatives who voted for the measures and created the funds for the Watauga Dam. He relocated his property to Pine Orchard Community. It says it's a new 8-room brick house, but I am fairly sure that they moved his house from Old Butler. And he relocated directly across from Pine Orchard School, which seemed to be a good plan. I don't think anybody told him that school would close within 2 years after the dam, or that there would be other small grocery stores within a mile from his grocery store. So his business never recovered. One of the neat things that my brother told me about a couple of weeks ago when I was in there, there's a trap door in the floor, and I'm like, what is that for? It's for chickens, live chickens. So you come to buy something, you pay with a live chicken. It went under the floor, and then if you wanted to buy live chicken, you could reach under the floor and sell you a chicken. Go ahead. But you knew that your chicken was fresh.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead. I love the line. Nobody had to worry about their dryer, whether or not their dryer was working, because they didn't have one. Go ahead. The Bluebird Tea Room, we do have something at the museum to show what the Bluebird Tea Room looked like. And basically, Mr. and Mrs. Netherly, they ran a lunch counter at the Bluebird Tea Room. They also had a lot of other stuff going on, some borders, and they owned part of the hotel, and they were just busy little people. But the Bluebird Tea Room, you could go and you could have a nice meal. You could buy your bus ticket. You could buy your train ticket. But basically, you could just have conversation. Watauga Academy, I've always been confused about whether or not it was a college. Was it not? I don't think it was, actually. In 1982, it was Enon Seminary. It became Holly Springs, and then in 1906, it became Watauga Academy. It was part of the Watauga Baptist Association for a very long time, and it did have a very demanding curriculum. It became the high school for Butler in 1930, so it became part of the Johnson County school system. In 1942, there was 4 teachers at the Watauga Academy and 1 music teacher, which was Selma Curtis, and the building was not moved. I could talk to you for a whole hour on the bricks at the church, okay? But I'm not going to. But the handmade bricks were harvested and used in a church in Virginia Avenue Church in Bristol. So the first class that graduated from Watauga Academy was Miss Donna Pierce and the Honorable B. Carol Reese. Ms. Pierce became the head nurse in the Tennessee Department of Health for several years, and Mr. Reese represented the 1st Congressional District in Congress for about 20 years. So there's his picture. He was our representative at the time of the dam. He did try to prevent it, but he didn't have that kind of power. He has his own museum at East Tennessee State University. Go ahead. Edmund Spencer Blackburn, he was a lawyer, legislator, and congressman and Republican Party leader. He was actually from Meat Camp. I don't know that I've been to Meat Camp, but so in Watauga County, and he attended Watauga Academy as well. And Robert Butler, his parents actually were living in the Watauga Reservoir area at the time of they had an assessment done. He was a lawyer, politician, jurist. He served in the U.S. House of Representatives from Oregon from 1928 to 1933, and the Oregon State Senate, and he was a state circuit court judge, and he was born in Butler. So it's very unusual that someplace so small and tiny, the Watauga Academy had 3 graduates that went on to become congressmen. So Watauga Academy also has a lot of history with our teachers here in Johnson County. The first one I wanted to tell you about is Edna Honeycutt. She was very proud of the fact, oh, by the way, her Honeycutt stalk-up, that she was the valedictorian for the last class of Watauga Academy. She probably spent 40 years in the school system. She was one of the first teachers at the new Watauga School. Mary Ward, who helped with building, getting the Watauga or the Butler and Watauga Museum done. She was my history teacher. She was very good. She was also a graduate from Watauga Academy. And then Norman Duggar's picture is at the museum as well. And he was my woodworking teacher, and he was a World War II veteran, came back, used his GI Bill, went to school, and became a hardworking teacher within the Johnson County system. Okay. This is one of my favorites. This is Miss Elsa Litford. She graduated from Watauga Academy, and she married Gale Stout after his discharge from the military in 1945, and she spent her career working with children in the Watauga Elementary School.
She's still alive. She's 103 years old, and she's in.
And so is her brother Joe. They're both still, yeah. And I think Joe's 102.
Yeah,
He's just 101
in August.
Yeah. Okay. The barbershop. We have the barbershop at the museum, and Mr. Stout, he moved the barbershop to Elizabethton, and he worked until he was 90. And his family donated the barbershop stuff. Go ahead. All right, cemetery removal. Am I holding your attention? I don't see a lot of wiggling yet. Okay. Cemetery. Oh, stop wiggling. Every cemetery was numbered. Every grave in the cemetery was numbered. They had to find the next of kin for everyone. And I got to tell you, at Cobbs Creek Cemetery, which is also known as the Rambo Cemetery, which is Cemetery 69, and grave number 335 with W.A. Shoun's amputated leg. He opted to leave it there, okay? They moved 1,281 graves. The Butler Memorial Cemetery was part of the new town of Carterview, and most of the graves from Cobbs Creek Church Cemetery were moved to the new Butler Memorial Cemetery. And the families had to be contacted. They had, you couldn't be moved if you died of anything that was contagious, such as cholera, but the family had decided they wanted to move you or not. Now remember, the government is not always what they seem to be. So the families had to purchase their new grave sites. You know, go ahead. So what happens is you get the notification, you decide if you want to move mama or daddy or both of them, and Like my great grandmother, she actually didn't have people move, but her stepchildren did. So the day that my great grandfather was moved, so was his father and his mother, his first wife, and one of their children. They were all done on the same day. So basically, they asked the families to be there at the disinterment, which is this picture. They hopefully they found the grave. Go ahead. Then they had to disinter and reinter in the same day, and the remains could only be moved within Tennessee, with the exception of you could move across the state line for adjoining counties, but not a lot were moved across the state lines. And it had to be, like I say, reinterred within the same day. There was a lot of rules about it. The cemetery graves, each family had to make contact. The TVA paid for the relocation of the graves. They actually contracted this out. You got to decide where you wanted to move. They would put you in a new box if your coffin was messed up or you didn't have a coffin. And I am saying new box. It was a pine box. They had 3 different sizes. They were supposed to wear rubber gloves and masks when they were moving the graves. I see a lot of pictures where they did not. And again, the family was asked to be there when they took them out. I hear a lot of stories about, some things that people would poof, and that could be true. I don't know. This is an assessment of the Pierce Cemetery, number 3, I think. Basically, it tells me who their relative was, their address, their relationship. And by the way, think about how hard this is because nobody had a telephone. I don't know that anybody had a telephone in Butler. I didn't see that. I mean, they were really concerned if you had electricity in the indoor bathroom, but nobody asked about a telephone. Go ahead. When they disinterred you, they made a list of everything. So this is my great-grandfather. His box or his coffin had collapsed, and his remains were still intact. Go ahead. But this is his first wife. She actually had a headstone, and this is what the headstone said. Her container had decayed, and there was only small parts of the large bones left and parts of her skull. There was rusty nails and parts of the casket handles. But they would take the dirt and all that thing and put it in whatever box number that was, and then they would take it to the new grave. And they tried really hard to match everything up and hope they didn't mess up. So everything was documented, whether or not there was jewelry, clothes, bones, nails, whatever. I did find some letters where some children, a mother wrote and said, my daughter had a necklace on, could you get that for me? And things like that. The headstones were removed and repaired by the TVA. There was sticks placed by the grave if they didn't have a headstone. And there are some examples of those in Pierce Cemetery number 3 now. There's still a couple of the sticks left because even though the cemetery didn't get moved, it got assessed. And it's at 0.8 subdivision. Go ahead. So this is just a picture of Cobbs Creek Baptist Church and School. The Cobbs Creek community is the one who wanted to have a new town. The Butler itself said, no, we don't want to. But the Cobbs Creek community wanted that new town. And so they are the ones who initiated it. And that's the reason it's called Carter View. This is Reverend M.H. Carter in his pulpit. He's the one who went to the TVA and said, oh, the church would like to have a new community. And he helped secure some financing so that they could start the Cobbs Creek Land Company to purchase land and then do a subdivision. And that's what they did. They bought 2 farms, and the TVA provided a town planner to I'm laughing, I'm sorry. They designed the perfect town of Butler. most of the time, people who moved in, they did not have any utilities ready at that time. I know the school wasn't completed until around 52 or 53. That it changed back to Butler in 1953. The people wanted something to reclaim their heritage from the loss of their homes in Butler, so they renamed the town again. The Butler and Watauga Heritage Museum, we need your help. We're looking for volunteers. I believe Johnson County Historical Society will take volunteers as well. And so if you want to volunteer, please contact the museum. And then finally, October 1st is Butler Days. So come and join us, and maybe you can hear some more stories about the people of Butler. I hope you've enjoyed it.